Get your hands off me now. The words cut through Terminal C at Denver International Airport like a blade. Captain Terrence Bradford's voice carried authority even as Officer Logan Bennett's hands gripped his shoulders, shoving him backward into a row of plastic chairs. Phones came out immediately. A teenager near Gate 47 started recording. A businessman by the coffee shop raised his camera. Within seconds, at least 15 passengers were documenting what would become the most viral airport incident of 2025. Logan Bennett stood 6'2". His police uniform stretched tight across a frame that suggested too many hours at the gym, and not enough time reading department policy manuals. His hand rested on his service weapon as he glared at the man he'd just physically assaulted. "You need to learn some respect," Logan said, his voice loud enough to carry across the terminal. "I don't care what you think you are. In my airport, you follow my orders." Terrence Bradford remained standing despite the shove. At 42 years old, he carried himself with the precise posture of someone who'd spent 2 decades in military service. His Air Force dress blues were immaculate, ribbons and medals arranged in perfect regulation order. His captain's bars gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "Officer, I've shown you my military ID, my pilot's license, and my boarding pass," Terrence said, his tone measured despite the situation. "I've committed no crime. You have no legal authority to detain me." Logan stepped closer, invading Terrence's personal space in a classic intimidation tactic. "I got a report of a suspicious person loitering near the gates." "That's you, so you're gonna wait right here while I verify your story." Woman near Gate 46 stepped forward. Dr. Aisha. Patel had been waiting for her, connecting flight to San Francisco when the confrontation began. She held up her phone, recording clearly. "Officer, this man has been sitting quietly reading a book for the past 30 minutes, she said. "There's nothing suspicious about him. The only disturbance here is you." Logan whirled on her. "Ma'am, step back and mind your business before I cite you for interfering with a police investigation." "What investigation?" Dr. Patel pressed. "This man is clearly a military officer. He's done absolutely nothing wrong." Terrence raised a hand slightly, a calming gesture. "Doctor, I appreciate your support, but please don't put yourself at risk. This officer is looking for an excuse to escalate." "Damn right I'll escalate," Logan snapped. His hand moved to his handcuffs. "Turn around." Hands behind your back, the terminal had gone quiet. 50 passengers in the immediate area were watching now. The coffee shop had emptied, baristas leaning over the counter to see. Even the TSA agents at the nearby checkpoint had stopped screening passengers to observe. "On what charge?" Terrence asked, still not moving. "Disorderly conduct. Failure to comply with lawful orders. Resisting arrest." Logan rattled off charges like he'd used them many times before. "I haven't resisted anything," Terrence replied calmly. "I've complied with every lawful request. But I will not allow you to violate my civil rights without documenting it." He pulled out his phone and started recording. The timestamp showed 3:47 p.m., June 15, 2025. Denver International Airport Terminal C. Logan's face flushed red. "I said, put that phone away." "I have a constitutional right to record this interaction," Terrence stated. "Multiple court decisions have established this clearly. By attempting to prevent me from recording, you're violating my First Amendment rights." A man in a Marine Corps t-shirt pushed through the crowd. James Kowalski was 73, a Vietnam veteran who'd seen enough injustice in his lifetime to recognize it immediately. "Officer, this man is a decorated military officer," Kowalski said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "You need to back down and apologize before you create an incident that destroys your career." Logan turned his glare on the old Marine. "Unless you want to join him in handcuffs, I suggest you shut your mouth." Kowalski didn't move. "I served this country for 30 years. I know what military bearing looks like. This man hasn't done anything wrong, and you know it." The confrontation had attracted airport security now. Officer Rashida Coleman arrived first, her uniform identifying her as airport police rather than city police like Logan. She'd been patrolling Terminal B when the call came through about a disturbance. "What's going on here?" Rashida asked, positioning herself between Logan and Terrence. Logan turned his aggression toward her. "City police business." "Step aside." Rashida didn't move. "Officer Bennett, this is airport property. Airport police have primary jurisdiction." "What's the situation?" "This suspect was loitering and acting suspiciously," Logan said. "He's refused to cooperate with my investigation." Terrence held up his phone, still recording. Officer Coleman, I'd like to file a formal complaint. Officer Bennett physically assaulted me without cause, has threatened to arrest me on false charges, and has attempted to prevent me from exercising my constitutional rights. Rashida looked at Terrence's uniform, taking in the ribbons and medals, the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, the Iraq Campaign Medal, the Afghanistan Campaign Medal. This wasn't some random traveler. This was a decorated military officer. Captain Bradford, she said, reading his name tag. Can I see your identification? Terrence handed over his military ID and pilot's license. Rashida examined them carefully, then looked at Logan. Officer Bennett, this man is clearly who he says he is. What probable cause did you have for detaining him? Logan's jaw clenched. I received a report of suspicious activity. From whom? Rashida pressed. Logan hesitated just long enough to reveal the truth. There had been no report. He'd profiled Terrence based on his race and decided to exercise his authority. A black military officer reading a book in an airport terminal shouldn't trigger suspicion in any reasonable person's mind. Rashida said quietly, I think you need to step back and let this gentleman catch his flight. I'm not done with my investigation, Logan insisted. Yes, you are, Rashida replied firmly. Captain Bradford, I apologize for this incident. You're free to proceed to your gate. Terrence nodded but didn't move to leave. Officer Coleman, I want to file formal charges for assault and civil rights violations. That physical contact was unprovoked and unjustified. Logan stepped forward aggressively. You're not filing anything. You're lucky I'm not arresting you right now. Officer Bennett, you need to walk away, Rashida warned. Now. The crowd had swelled to over 100 people. Passengers from other gates had wandered over. Airport staff lined the perimeter, and every phone was recording. That's when someone in the crowd shouted something that changed everything. Look at his ribbons. That's a DFC. Do you know what you have to do to earn a Distinguished Flying Cross? James Kowalski's voice rang out. I'll tell you what you have to do. You have to perform acts of heroism or extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight. That medal means this man risked his life for his country. Logan's face contorted with rage. I don't care about his medals. He was acting suspicious, and I have every right to investigate. Acting suspicious how? Dr. Patel called out from the crowd. By reading a book while black? The phrase hung in the air. Several people in the crowd murmured agreement. This wasn't about suspicious activity. This was about racial profiling. Terrence's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and his expression changed slightly. He answered, speaking quietly. Hayes? Yeah, I'm delayed. No, I'm fine. Actually, you should probably get down here. Terminal C, Gate 47. Trust me, you'll want to see this. He ended the call and looked directly at Logan. Officer Bennett, in approximately 7 minutes, you're going to deeply regret how you've handled this situation. Is that a threat? Logan demanded. It's a fact, Terrence replied calmly. Rashida was on her radio now, calling for her supervisor. The situation was escalating beyond her authority to manage. She needed backup, and she needed documentation of everything that was happening. Logan made his fatal mistake. Frustrated by the crowd, humiliated by the pushback, and angry at losing control of the situation, he grabbed Terrence's arm and twisted it behind his back. That's it. You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. Terrence didn't resist. He'd been trained in military protocol, knew that physical resistance would only make things worse. But his voice carried across the terminal with unmistakable authority. Officer Bennett, you are committing assault and false arrest. Every moment of this is being recorded by dozens of witnesses. Your career is over. Logan snapped the handcuffs on, clicking them tight enough to hurt. Shut your mouth before I add charges. The crowd erupted in angry shouts. Several veterans in the crowd started pushing forward. Dr. Patel was yelling that someone needed to call the news. James Kowalski was demanding Logan's badge number. Rashida stepped between Logan and the crowd, her hands raised. Everyone, please step back. This situation is being documented and will be reviewed by my supervisors. A young woman near Gate 48 was live streaming the entire incident. Her viewer count had hit 5,000 and climbing. The chat was exploding with outrage. Beth Sanderson, a reporter for Denver's Channel 7 News, happened to be in the terminal waiting for a flight. She'd been monitoring social media and saw the live stream. Within seconds, she was running toward Gate 47 with her phone out. The timestamp showed 3:52 p.m. Terrence had been in handcuffs for approximately 2 minutes. His flight to San Antonio was scheduled to depart in 18 minutes. Logan was calling for city police backup on his radio. "This is Bennett at DIA Terminal C. I've got a subject in custody. Need transport to the county jail for processing." "On what charges?" Rashida demanded. "Captain Bradford has committed no crime. You're making an illegal arrest." "That's for the courts to decide," Logan shot back. The elevator doors at the end of Terminal C opened. 3 figures emerged, walking with unmistakable military precision. They wore Air Force uniforms with rank insignia that made several passengers gasp. Lieutenant Colonel Isaiah Hayes led the group. At 50 years old, he commanded the 460th Operations Group at Buckley Space Force Base. Behind him walked Sergeant Danielle Rivers, military police, and another officer whose uniform bore the insignia of the Judge Advocate General's Corps. Isaiah took in the scene with a single glance. His friend and fellow officer in handcuffs, surrounded by an angry crowd, with a city police officer who clearly had no idea what he'd just done. "Officer, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Isaiah Hayes, United States Air Force." He held up his military ID. "That man you have in handcuffs is one of my pilots. What's the situation?" Logan's confidence wavered for the first time. "He's under arrest for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest." Isaiah walked closer, his presence commanding immediate respect. "Captain Bradford is a decorated combat pilot with a spotless record. What specifically did he do that constituted disorderly conduct?" "He was acting suspicious, loitering near the gates, and refused to cooperate with my investigation." Isaiah looked at Terrence, still handcuffed, standing with military bearing despite the humiliation. "Terry, what happened?" Terrence's voice remained calm. "Colonel, I was sitting near Gate 47 reading a book while waiting for my flight. Officer Bennett approached me without probable cause, demanded identification, physically assaulted me when I questioned his authority, and threatened to arrest me when I attempted to record the interaction. When I invoked my civil rights, he placed me in handcuffs." Isaiah turned back to Logan, his expression hardening. "Officer, you've assaulted a United States Air Force officer without cause. You've violated his civil rights, and you've committed false arrest. I strongly suggest you remove those handcuffs immediately." "I'm conducting a lawful arrest," Logan insisted, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. Sergeant Rivers stepped forward. She was military police trained in both military law and civilian law enforcement. "Officer Bennett, as a peace officer, you should be aware that false arrest is both a crime and grounds for civil liability. You have no probable cause for this arrest." Logan looked around. The crowd had grown even larger. Airport security had arrived in force. News cameras were setting up. His supervisor, Sheriff Dennis Clark, was pushing through the crowd looking absolutely furious. "Bennett, what the hell is going on here?" Clark demanded. Isaiah provided the answer. "Sheriff, your officer has assaulted and falsely arrested a decorated military officer based on racial profiling. The entire incident has been recorded by dozens of witnesses. Unless you want your department facing federal civil rights investigations, I suggest you address this immediately." Clark looked at Terrence in handcuffs, at the Air Force personnel, at the cameras recording everything. His face went pale as he understood the magnitude of what Logan had done. "Remove the handcuff," Clark ordered. "Now." "Sheriff, this suspect was—" Logan began. "That's Captain Bradford to you," Isaiah interrupted. "Address him by his proper rank." Clark stepped closer to Logan, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that still carried in the tense silence. "Remove the handcuffs immediately. That's a direct order." Logan's hands shook slightly as he unlocked the handcuffs. Terrence rubbed his wrists where the metal had dug into his skin, red marks visible. "Captain Bradford, I apologize for this incident," Clark said formally. "This officer will face disciplinary action." "Sheriff Clark, with all due respect, disciplinary action isn't sufficient," Isaiah said. "This is assault, false arrest, and violation of civil rights. We'll be filing formal charges and pursuing this through military and civilian channels." The crowd erupted in applause. Beth Sanderson was reporting live for Channel 7 News. The live stream had reached 15,000 viewers, and Terrence Bradford was checking his watch, noting that his flight was departing in 11 minutes. "I need to catch my flight," Terrence said quietly. "We'll escort you," Isaiah replied. He turned to Clark. "Sheriff, We'll expect full documentation of this incident within 24 hours. Officer Bennett should consult with legal counsel immediately. Logan stood frozen, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. His career in law enforcement was effectively over. The videos would go viral, the lawsuits would be devastating, and he'd done it all because a black man reading a book had offended his sense of who belonged where. As Terrence walked toward his gate, flanked by Air Force personnel, James Kowalski called out from the crowd, "Thank you for your service, Captain." Others picked up the phrase. "Thank you for your service" echoed through Terminal C as a decorated military pilot finally proceeded to catch his flight. The timestamp showed 3:59 p.m. 12 minutes had passed since Logan Bennett first approached Terrence Bradford, but those 12 minutes would reshape careers, policies, and lives. 22 years earlier, Terrence Bradford stood in front of an Air Force recruiter's office in South Chicago, staring at a poster showing fighter jets streaking across blue sky. He was 20 years old, working 2 minimum wage jobs, and seeing his friends disappear into the criminal justice system one by one. The recruiter, a sergeant named Marcus Phillips, looked up from his desk and saw something in the young man's eyes: determination, intelligence, and a desperate hunger for something better than the streets were offering. "You interested in flying?" Phillips asked. Terrence nodded slowly. "Is it possible?" "For someone like me?" Phillips understood the question beneath the question. A black kid from the South Side asking if the Air Force would actually give him a chance or just use him as cannon fodder. "Kid, I'm not gonna lie to you. The Air Force has problems with racism like every institution. But if you're smart, determined, and willing to work harder than everyone else, you can fly. I've seen it happen." Terrence walked into that recruiting office and emerged 4 hours later having signed papers that would change his life. His ASVAB scores were in the 98th percentile. His physical fitness tests were exceptional, and his aptitude evaluation suggested he had the skills to become a pilot. Basic training at Lackland Air Force Base was brutal, not because of the physical demands, but because Terrence learned quickly that he had to be twice as good to be considered half as competent. His drill instructor, a white sergeant from Alabama, questioned every decision Terrence made. But Terrence persisted. When others slept, he studied. When others complained, he trained. When others quit, he pushed forward. Officer training school at Maxwell Air Force Base came next. The academic demands were intense, but Terrence thrived. He graduated in the top 5% of his class and received orders to undergraduate pilot training. Pilot training at Vance Air Force Base was where Terrence truly discovered himself. The first time he took control of a T-6 Texan II trainer aircraft, something clicked. The mechanics of flight made perfect sense to him. The physics, the aerodynamics, the split-second decision-making required, it all felt natural. His instructor pilot, Captain Rebecca Morgan, recognized his talent immediately. She was one of the few female pilots in the program and understood what it meant to constantly prove yourself against prejudice. "Bradford, you're a natural aviator," she told him after his first solo flight. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise," but others tried. There were instructors who questioned his judgment. Classmates who suggested he'd only been selected for diversity quotas. Senior officers who expressed surprise at his competence, as if black pilots were some kind of anomaly. Terrence graduated pilot training and received his wings. His first assignment was flying C-130 Hercules transport aircraft. Not the glamorous fighter jets he'd dreamed about, but essential work that took him all over the world. Iraq came first. Terrence flew supply missions into Baghdad International Airport during the height of the insurgency. Enemy fire was routine. Landing in combat zones became his specialty. He earned the Air Medal on his 14th mission when his aircraft was hit by ground fire, but he managed to complete the delivery and return safely with his crew intact. Afghanistan followed. Terrence flew into forward operating bases so remote that his C-130 was the only supply line between the troops and civilization. He flew in sandstorms, through mountain passes, and under conditions that terrified more experienced pilots. The Distinguished Flying Cross came on his 63rd combat mission. Intelligence indicated a Marine unit was surrounded and running low on ammunition. Weather conditions made flight impossible according to every meteorological assessment. But those Marines needed supplies or they wouldn't survive the night. Terrence volunteered. His crew thought he was insane, but they trusted him. He flew through a sandstorm that reduced visibility to zero, navigated by instruments and instinct, and landed on a dirt strip that was barely long enough. The Marines got their supplies. All of them made it home. The medal ceremony felt hollow to Terrence. He'd just done his job, but the recognition opened doors. He received orders to instructor duty, training the next generation of pilots. That's when he met Isaiah Hayes. Isaiah was a lieutenant colonel running the training squadron, a black officer who'd climbed higher than most people thought possible. He became a mentor, showing Terrence how to navigate the politics of military service while maintaining integrity. "You're going to face resistance your entire career," Isaiah told him during a late-night conversation in the squadron bar. "Every promotion, every assignment, every opportunity, someone will question whether you deserve it. You have to be so good that they can't deny you without revealing their prejudice." Terrence took that advice to heart. He became the best instructor pilot in the squadron. His students had the highest graduation rates. His evaluations were flawless, and slowly, grudgingly, even the most skeptical officers had to acknowledge his excellence. But recognition came at a cost. Terrence watched white pilots with inferior records receive choice assignments while he remained in training duty year after year. He saw promotion boards pass him over for officers who hadn't flown combat missions. He endured countless microaggressions from senior officers who questioned his judgment. The breaking point came when a white major with half of Terrence's flight hours and no combat experience received command of a squadron that Terrence had been promised. The selection board's justification was that the major had better leadership potential. Terrence filed an equal opportunity complaint. The investigation dragged on for 8 months and ultimately concluded that while there were concerns about the selection process, there wasn't sufficient evidence of discrimination. That's when Isaiah pulled him aside. "Terry, I know you're frustrated. Hell, I'm frustrated for you. But you have a choice. You can either let this destroy you, or you can use it as fuel to become so undeniably excellent that they can't ignore you anymore." Terrence chose excellence. He volunteered for every difficult assignment. He mentored younger pilots, especially minorities who faced the same obstacles he had. He published articles on aviation tactics that became required reading. And gradually, his reputation grew beyond the boundaries of racial prejudice. The promotion to captain came 10 years into his career, later than his white peers but earned through undeniable merit. The assignment to test pilot school followed, one of the most prestigious positions in the Air Force, and throughout it all, Terrence maintained his integrity and his commitment to making the Air Force better for those who would follow him. But civilian life remained challenging. Every time Terrence put on civilian clothes and left the military base, he became just another black man subject to profiling, suspicion, and discrimination. He'd been pulled over by police 23 times in his adult life despite never receiving a traffic citation. He'd been followed in stores by security guards who assumed he was shoplifting. He'd been denied service at restaurants where the hostess suddenly discovered they were fully booked when he walked in. Each incident reinforced the same lesson: his military service, his accomplishments, his character. None of it mattered when people judged him solely by his skin color. Terrence started documenting every discriminatory incident. He learned to record interactions with his phone. He studied civil rights law. He understood that change required evidence, documentation, and strategic action. The trip to Denver International Airport on June 15, 2025, was supposed to be routine. Terrence was flying to San Antonio for a training conference, wearing civilian clothes because he preferred not to wear his uniform when traveling. He'd arrived at the airport 2 hours early, checked his bag, cleared security, and settled near his gate with a book about military aviation history. Officer Logan Bennett noticed him within 5 minutes. Terrence saw the officer's gaze linger, saw the subtle body language of suspicion. He'd experienced it hundreds of times before. When Bennett approached, Terrence knew exactly what was coming. The questions about what he was doing there, the demands for identification, the escalating aggression when he asserted his rights. What Bennett didn't know was that Terrence had dealt with situations like this dozens of times. He knew how to stay calm under pressure, how to document discrimination, and how to use the system against those who abuse their authority. The physical shove changed everything. That was assault, clear and unambiguous. The false arrest compounded the violation, and the entire incident captured on multiple cameras provided the documentation needed for meaningful action. As Terrence sat in his seat on the flight to San Antonio, his wrists still sore from the handcuffs, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From the south side of Chicago to Air Force captain, from poverty to respect, from powerlessness to the authority to demand accountability. But he also understood that his story wasn't exceptional. Thousands of black military members faced discrimination regularly. Most didn't have the resources or knowledge to fight back effectively. Most endured it silently because challenging the system seemed impossible. That's why Terrence had already decided that Logan Bennett's assault wouldn't be handled quietly. This would become a test case, a public example of how institutional racism operated and how it could be challenged through documentation, legal action, and public pressure. His phone buzzed with a text from Isaiah. "Media is requesting interviews. How do you want to handle this?" Terrence typed his response. "Full transparency. We document everything, cooperate with media, and make this a teaching moment. No quiet settlements. This ends publicly." The plane reached cruising altitude. Terrence opened his laptop and began writing a detailed account of the incident. Every moment, every word spoken, every action taken. The document would become evidence, but it would also become something more, a blueprint for others facing similar discrimination. 12 rows behind Terrence, a young black airman named Jonathan Freeman sat watching his commanding officer work. Jonathan had heard stories about Captain Bradford, about his reputation for excellence and integrity, but he'd never witnessed it personally. Today's incident had shown Jonathan something important. Discrimination didn't end just because you wore a military uniform, but it could be challenged, documented, and defeated through systematic action. Jonathan pulled out his own phone and started typing notes. He'd experienced discrimination too, though never as dramatically as what he'd witnessed today. But Captain Bradford's example showed him that silence wasn't the only option. The flight attendant made an announcement about their estimated arrival time. Terrence saved his document and closed his laptop. The real work would begin when they landed. Legal filings, media interviews, formal complaints, and the systematic dismantling of Officer Logan Bennett's career. But more importantly, this incident would become a case study. Military academies would analyze it. Police departments would review their policies because of it. And future officers, both military and law enforcement, would learn from it. That's what systematic change looked like. Not just punishing individuals, but using their failures to transform institutions. The Denver Police Department's Internal Affairs Office occupied the third floor of the downtown headquarters building. On June 16th, barely 12 hours after the airport incident, Lieutenant Sandra Morrison sat reviewing surveillance footage for the 7th time. She'd been investigating officer misconduct for 11 years and thought she'd seen everything. But Logan Bennett's assault on Captain Bradford was remarkable for its brazenness and stupidity. The video evidence was overwhelming. 17 different angles captured on passenger phones, airport security footage, even Bennett's own body camera, which he'd forgotten to turn off. Every moment documented in crystal clarity. Morrison watched Bennett shove Bradford, saw the racist profiling, witnessed the false arrest, and she knew immediately that this case would destroy careers and potentially spark federal investigations. Sheriff Dennis Clark sat across from her desk, looking 10 years older than he had yesterday. The media firestorm had been brutal. 3 local news stations had run the story as their lead. CNN had picked it up nationally. Social media was calling for Bennett's immediate termination and criminal prosecution. "What's your assessment?" Clark asked. Morrison closed her laptop and met his gaze. "Sheriff, this is the worst case of police misconduct I've investigated in my career. Officer Bennett committed assault, false arrest, civil rights violations, and did so with clear racial bias. We have no defense. We're going to lose every lawsuit filed against us, and we deserve to." Clark rubbed his face wearily. "What are you recommending?" "Immediate termination, criminal charges for assault and deprivation of rights under color of law, full cooperation with federal civil rights investigations, and complete transparency with the media. Bennett has union representation. He'll fight termination." Morrison pulled up Bennett's personnel file on her computer. "Sheriff, Officer Bennett has 8 prior complaints for excessive force in his 7-year career. 6 of those complaints involved minority victims. Our department has a pattern and practice problem, and Bennett is Exhibit A. She clicked through the files showing Clark the documentation. Complaint after complaint, all handled through internal discipline that amounted to wrist slaps. A pattern of racial profiling that supervisors had ignored or minimized. We've enabled this behavior, Morrison continued. Every time we failed to properly discipline Bennett, we sent a message that racist policing was acceptable. Captain Bradford's assault didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the culmination of years of our institutional failures. Clark stood and walked to the window, looking out at downtown Denver. What happens now? Morrison had already drafted her recommendations. Full investigation of the department's handling of racial bias. Complaints going back 10 years. Mandatory bias training for all officers. Creation of an independent civilian oversight board. And termination of any officer with documented patterns of discriminatory behavior. And Bennett? Clark asked. Criminal prosecution, Morrison said firmly. This wasn't a mistake or bad judgment. This was criminal assault motivated by racial animus. We refer it to the district attorney today. The district attorney's office was already ahead of them. District Attorney Robert Hamilton had watched the viral videos and recognized immediately that his office had to act decisively or face accusations of protecting police misconduct. He convened his senior prosecutors for an emergency meeting. The conference room was packed with attorneys who specialized in criminal civil rights cases. This is straightforward, Hamilton told his team. We have clear video evidence of assault. We have documentation of false arrest. And we have indisputable proof of racial bias in how Officer Bennett treated Captain Bradford versus how he treats white suspects. What charges are we filing? Asked Sarah Lynn, the chief prosecutor. Assault in the third degree, false imprisonment and violation of civil rights under color of law, Hamilton replied. We're also looking at federal charges in cooperation with the U.S. Attorney's Office. The federal angle was critical. Assault alone might result in probation or minimal jail time, but civil rights violations under federal law carried serious prison sentences. United States Attorney Jennifer Walsh had already reached out to Hamilton's office. Her Civil Rights Division was opening a pattern and practice investigation into the Denver Police Department. Bennett's assault on Captain Bradford had triggered scrutiny of the entire department's record on racial bias. Meanwhile, Terrence Bradford sat in a conference room at Buckley Space Force Base with a legal team that would have intimidated a corporate law firm. The Air Force Judge Advocate General's Corps had assigned 3 military attorneys to his case. He'd also retained a civilian attorney who specialized in civil rights litigation. Attorney Marcus Reynolds had built a career on police misconduct cases. He'd won multi-million-dollar settlements against departments across the country. And he'd watched the viral videos of Terrence's assault with the enthusiasm of a surgeon examining a perfect textbook case. Captain Bradford, this is about as clear-cut a case as I've ever seen, Reynolds said, reviewing the documentation. We have assault captured on multiple cameras. We have false arrest. We have racial profiling. We have violation of your First Amendment rights when Bennett tried to stop you from recording. And we have a documented pattern of similar behavior from this officer. What's our strategy? Terrence asked. Reynolds smiled. We're going to make an example of Officer Bennett and the Denver Police Department. Federal civil rights lawsuit seeking damages for assault, false arrest, emotional distress, and violation of civil rights. We'll demand policy changes, training reforms, and independent oversight. Just money isn't enough, Terrence said quietly. I want systematic change. That's exactly what we're going to get, Reynolds replied. But first, we need to understand the full scope of Bennett's misconduct. Reynolds had already filed Freedom of Information Act requests for Bennett's entire personnel file, all complaints against him, and all body camera footage from the past 5 years. He'd also requested similar data on the entire Denver Police Department's handling of racial bias complaints. The media strategy was equally important. Beth Sanderson from Channel 7 News had requested an exclusive interview with Terrence. Reynolds recognized the opportunity. We do the interview, but we control the narrative, Reynolds explained. You tell your story completely and honestly. You emphasize that this isn't about one bad officer. It's about systemic failures. You call for policy changes, not just punishment. Terrence nodded. When? Tomorrow. Primetime news. Maximum viewership. The interview took place in a conference room at Buckley Space Force Base. Beth Sanderson had prepared extensively, reviewing all the footage, researching Terrence's military record, and understanding the broader context of racial profiling. Captain Bradford, thank you for agreeing to this interview, Beth began. Can you walk us through what happened at the airport? Terrence told the story calmly, without emotion or exaggeration. Just facts, timeline, and clear documentation of discriminatory treatment. The camera zoomed in on the red marks still visible on his wrists from the handcuffs. Beth asked permission to photograph them. The images would become iconic, a visual representation of state-sanctioned violence against black bodies. How did you stay so calm during the incident? Beth asked. Terrence considered the question carefully. As a military officer, I'm trained to maintain composure under pressure. But more than that, I understood that losing my temper would only give Officer Bennett justification for further violence. My best defense was documentation and witnesses. What do you want to see happen now? Terrence looked directly into the camera. I want Officer Bennett prosecuted to the full extent of the law. I want the Denver Police Department to acknowledge its systematic failures in addressing racial bias. And I want policy changes that prevent this from happening to other people who don't have my resources or platform to fight back. The interview aired on June 17th during the evening news. Within an hour, it had been viewed 300,000 times online. By the next morning, it had reached 2 million views. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. The Denver Police Department received thousands of calls demanding Bennett's termination. The mayor's office was flooded with emails calling for police reform. Protest organizers announced demonstrations scheduled for the weekend. Logan Bennett watched the interview from his lawyer's office, his face pale. Attorney David Morrison, no relation to Lieutenant Sandra Morrison, had been trying to prepare Bennett for the legal storm heading his way. You're going to face criminal charges, David said bluntly. The video evidence is overwhelming. The best we can do is negotiate a plea deal that minimizes your prison time. David finished. Bennett slammed his fist on the table. This is bullshit. I was doing my job. That guy was acting suspicious. David pulled up the airport surveillance footage on his laptop. Logan, watch this. Really watch it. The video showed Terrence sitting quietly, reading a book. No suspicious behavior. No threatening gestures. Just a man waiting for his flight. He's black and in an airport, David said quietly. That's what made you suspicious. And that's why you're going to prison. Bennett's face flushed. I'm not racist. I treat everyone the same. David opened another file, this one containing Bennett's personnel record. Logan, you have 8 complaints for excessive force. 6 involve minority victims. You've used racial slurs in radio communications that were recorded. Your body camera footage shows a pattern of treating white suspects with courtesy and minority suspects with aggression. That's taken out of context. There is no context that makes shoving a decorated military officer and arresting him without cause acceptable, David replied. The Denver PD is going to terminate you to save themselves. The district attorney is going to prosecute you to demonstrate accountability. And Captain Bradford's attorneys are going to sue you personally for millions of dollars you don't have. Bennett stared at the table, reality finally penetrating his denial. Your career is over, David continued. Your reputation is destroyed. Your best-case scenario is pleading guilty to reduced charges and serving 2 years in prison. Your worst case is going to trial, being convicted on all counts and serving 8 to 10 years. 3 months after the settlement, Terrence received an unexpected phone call. The number had a Washington, D.C. area code he didn't recognize. Captain Bradford, this is Colonel Andrew Peterson from the Pentagon. Do you have a moment to talk? Terrence was in his office at Buckley Space Force Base reviewing training schedules. He closed his laptop and gave the call his full attention. Yes, sir. How can I help you? I'm calling on behalf of the Secretary of Defense. Your case against the Denver Police Department has caught attention at the highest levels of the Defense Department. We'd like to discuss expanding those reforms to how military personnel are treated in civilian contexts. Terrence leaned back in his chair, intrigued. What did you have in mind, Colonel? Peterson explained that the Defense Department received hundreds of complaints annually about military personnel facing discrimination while traveling in uniform or during off-base encounters with civilian law enforcement. Most incidents went unreported or were handled through informal channels. We want to create a formal liaison program between the military and civilian law enforcement. Peterson continued, training for police on military culture and appropriate interaction with service members, clear protocols for handling incidents, and accountability measures when things go wrong. Over the following weeks, Terrence worked with Pentagon officials to develop the Military Civilian Law Enforcement Liaison Initiative. The program included mandatory training for law enforcement in communities near military bases, formal complaint procedures for service members facing discrimination, and Defense Department support for legal action when necessary. The program launched in February 2026 with pilot projects at 5 military installations. Within 6 months, reported incidents of discriminatory treatment decreased by 53%. The program expanded nationally by year's end, but the impact extended far beyond military contexts. Terrence's case had inspired a broader movement for accountability and documentation of discriminatory incidents. Dr. Aisha Patel, the passenger who'd witnessed and recorded the airport assault, created a smartphone app called Witness Now. The app allowed users to quickly record and upload videos of discriminatory incidents, automatically backing them up to secure cloud storage and connecting victims with legal resources. The app launched in January 2026 and reached 1 million downloads in 3 months. Users documented thousands of incidents of discrimination in retail settings, during traffic stops, in housing situations, and across virtually every sphere of American life. Each documented incident became potential evidence for civil rights litigation. Law firms specializing in discrimination cases used Witness Now footage to build cases against businesses, police departments, and institutions engaging in discriminatory practices. James Kowalski, the veteran who defended Terrence at the airport, founded Veterans Against Discrimination. The organization provided support for military veterans facing bias and connected them with legal resources. Kowalski's group filed 15 civil rights lawsuits in its first year, winning settlements totaling $23 million and forcing policy changes across multiple organizations. The social media impact was equally significant. The hashtag #MashGoodDocumentDiscrimination trended regularly as people shared their experiences and encouraged others to record encounters with law, enforcement, and other authorities. Civil rights attorney Marcus Reynolds found himself overwhelmed with cases. His firm expanded from 8 attorneys to 32 in 6 months to handle the volume of discrimination complaints generated by increased documentation. We're seeing a fundamental shift in how people respond to discrimination, Reynolds told reporters during an interview. Instead of accepting it silently or getting angry without recourse, people are systematically documenting injustice and demanding accountability through legal channels. The impact on corporate America was substantial. Companies faced with viral videos of employees discriminating against customers moved quickly to implement bias training and accountability measures. The potential cost of discrimination lawsuits and public relations disasters outweighed resistance to reform. Major retailers, including Walmart, Target, and Whole Foods, implemented comprehensive anti-discrimination policies directly inspired by Terrence's case. They created anonymous reporting systems for customers to document discriminatory treatment. They instituted regular bias training for all employees, and they established clear consequences for employees engaging in discrimination. The airline industry underwent particularly dramatic changes. Atlantic Airways wasn't the only carrier facing scrutiny. Every major airline reviewed its policies on passenger treatment and implemented reforms to prevent racial profiling. The Transportation Security Administration updated its screening procedures to address racial bias in security checks. Airport police departments nationwide received training on appropriate interaction with travelers of all races, and federal regulations required airlines to track and publicly report discrimination complaints. Educational institutions also felt the impact. Universities and colleges examined their admissions, discipline, and campus security practices through the lens of racial equity. Several institutions faced lawsuits from students who documented discriminatory treatment using techniques pioneered in Terrence's case. The criminal justice system began slowly acknowledging the need for reform. Prosecutors across the country started taking police misconduct cases more seriously after seeing Bennett's conviction. Defense attorneys used documented evidence of racial bias to challenge questionable arrests and searches. But the most profound changes occurred at the individual level. Millions of people who'd experienced discrimination but felt powerless to respond saw Terrence's example and realized they could demand accountability. Rachel Thompson, a Black professor at a prestigious university, documented a series of microaggressions from colleagues who questioned her qualifications. She filed a discrimination complaint with the university, backed by audio recordings and witness testimony. The university conducted a genuine investigation rather than dismissing her concerns, and 3 professors received discipline for creating a hostile work environment. Kevin Martinez, a Latino small business owner, recorded a bank loan officer making discriminatory comments during a loan application meeting. The footage went viral. The officer was terminated and the bank implemented comprehensive bias training for all lending staff. Martinez received his loan from a different institution, along with a settlement from the discriminatory bank. Dozens of similar stories emerged weekly. Individuals empowered by documentation and inspired by Terrence's success challenged discrimination in employment, housing, education, and public accommodations. Not every case won. Not every incident received justice. But the aggregate effect was undeniable. Discrimination was no longer accepted as an inevitable feature of American life. The backlash was predictable. Conservative media outlets criticized what they called a culture of victimhood and excessive focus on racism. Some argued that increased documentation of discrimination was actually creating more racial tension rather than resolving it. Terrence addressed these criticisms during a television appearance on a national news program. The interviewer, a white male host known for conservative views, challenged him directly. "Captain Bradford, critics say your case has encouraged people to see racism everywhere and has made normal interactions with law enforcement more difficult. How do you respond?" Terrence remained calm and measured. "With respect, documenting actual discrimination that occurs isn't creating racism. It's revealing racism that was always there but previously went unchallenged. The discomfort some people feel comes from confronting an uncomfortable truth, not from false accusations. But don't you think some people exploit these say?" The interviewer pressed further. "What about police officers who now feel they can't do their jobs because every interaction might be recorded and criticized?" Terrence leaned forward. "If an officer can't do their job without discriminating, they shouldn't be doing the job. Recording interactions protects good officers by documenting that they acted appropriately. It only threatens officers who engage in misconduct." The interview was watched by 4 million people and generated intense social media discussion, but it also demonstrated Terrence's ability to articulate complex ideas about racial justice in accessible terms that resonated across political divides. His military background gave him credibility with conservative audiences who might dismiss civilian activists. His calm demeanor and emphasis on systematic evidence over emotional appeals made his arguments difficult to dismiss, and his focus on institutional reform rather than individual blame offered a path forward that even skeptics could support. Universities began inviting Terrence to speak about leadership, integrity, and addressing systemic injustice. His speeches at Harvard, Stanford, Yale, and dozens of other institutions inspired a generation of students to pursue careers in civil rights law, police reform, and institutional accountability. One speech at Howard University was particularly powerful. Speaking to a predominantly black audience, Terrence addressed the psychological toll of experiencing discrimination. "Every black person in this audience has experienced what I experienced at that airport," he told the crowd. "Maybe not as dramatically, maybe not with viral videos and national attention, but you've all felt the sting of being judged by your skin color rather than your character or credentials." The audience murmured agreement. "That pain is real and valid," Terrence continued, "but we can't let it paralyze us. We have to channel it into systematic action that makes discrimination harder to practice and easier to challenge." He outlined practical steps. Document incidents. Know your rights. Seek legal counsel when appropriate. Support organizations fighting discrimination, and vote for officials committed to equality. But most importantly, he concluded, never accept discrimination as normal. Never tell yourself that it's just how things are. Every incident of injustice you challenge makes the next incident slightly less likely to occur. The speech received a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. But more importantly, it inspired concrete action. Howard University students launched a legal clinic providing free representation for discrimination victims. They created a database tracking discriminatory incidents in the D.C. area, and they organized community education programs teaching people how to document and report bias. Similar initiatives emerged at universities nationwide. Yale Law School created a civil rights documentation project training law students to assist discrimination victims. Berkeley developed a technology platform connecting victims with legal resources. Columbia partnered with civil rights organizations to provide pro bono representation in discrimination cases. The cumulative effect was a massive increase in accountability for discriminatory practices. Businesses, government agencies, and institutions that had operated with impunity faced genuine consequences when employees or officials engaged in bias. But Terrence understood that legal victories and policy reforms weren't enough. Cultural change required ongoing education and conversation about race, bias, and equality. He partnered with the Southern Poverty Law Center to develop educational materials about implicit bias and systematic racism. The materials were distributed to schools, police academies, corporate training programs, and community organizations. He worked with Hollywood producers to develop a film based on his experience. The movie, titled Flight to Justice, premiered in late 2026 to critical acclaim and commercial success. The film humanized both Terrence and even Officer Bennett, showing how systematic racism harms everyone involved. Rather than portraying Bennett as a one-dimensional villain, the film explored how unchecked biases and inadequate accountability systems created the conditions for his misconduct. The approach generated controversy, but also fostered more nuanced conversations about addressing racism. Terrence donated his proceeds from the film to establish the Bradford Foundation for Racial Justice. The foundation provided legal assistance to discrimination victims, funded research on bias reduction, and supported organizations working for police reform and equality. By the end of 2026, the foundation had supported 123 discrimination cases, funded 12 research projects on implicit bias, and provided grants to 47 civil rights organizations. But perhaps the most significant impact was harder to quantify. Terrence had become a symbol of the possibility of holding power accountable. His case demonstrated that systematic documentation, strategic legal action, and public pressure could force institutions to change even when they resisted. Every person who recorded a discriminatory encounter and filed a complaint was following Terrence's example. Every attorney who took a civil rights case on contingency was building on his legal strategy. Every policy reform implemented to prevent discrimination reflected lessons from his experience. The airport incident that had lasted 12 minutes in real time had generated ripple effects that would continue for decades. From one moment of documented injustice emerged a movement for accountability that was reshaping American institutions. January 2027 marked 18 months since the airport incident. Terrence sat in his office at Buckley Space Force Base, reviewing the previous year's impact assessments. The data was remarkable. Discrimination complaints filed with the EEOC increased by 47% nationally. But this wasn't because discrimination had increased. It was because victims finally felt empowered to report incidents they previously would have endured silently. More significantly, the percentage of complaints resulting in findings of discrimination and meaningful remedies increased from 11% to 32%. Documentation made the difference. Video evidence, witness statements, and systematic records turned he said, she said disputes into clear cases of discriminatory treatment. Police departments reported mixed results. Complaints about officer misconduct increased initially as documentation became more common, but departments that genuinely implemented reforms saw complaints decrease dramatically over time. Denver's experience proved representative. Initial increases followed by sustained decreases as accountability systems deterred misconduct. The economic impact was substantial. Businesses and institutions paid over $800 million in discrimination settlements in 2026, triple the previous year's total. The financial consequences forced organizations to take bias training and accountability seriously. But Terrence's attention was drawn to a different metric. Student enrollment in civil rights law programs increased by 68%. A new generation was choosing careers focused on fighting discrimination and promoting equality. That represented systemic change that would compound over decades. His phone rang. Isaiah's name appeared on the screen. "Terry, you need to turn on CNN," Isaiah said without preamble. Terrence reached for his television remote and switched to the news channel. The headline read, "Breaking, former officer Logan Bennett released on parole." The news report showed Bennett leaving prison after serving 14 months of his 4-year sentence. He'd been released early for good behavior and participation in rehabilitation programs. The reporter interviewed Bennett outside the prison gates. He looked older, thinner, and wore civilian clothes that hung loosely on his frame. "Mr. Bennett, what message do you have for the public?" Bennett looked directly into the camera. "I want to apologize to Captain Bradford and everyone I've hurt through my actions. I spent the last 14 months examining my biases and the harm they caused. I can't undo what I did, but I can commit to being part of the solution going forward," the reporter pressed. "What does that mean practically?" "I've been working with an organization that provides bias training to law enforcement. I'm going to share my story as a cautionary tale about how unchecked prejudice destroys lives. Mine, my victims, and the community's trust in police." Terrence watched without emotion. Part of him wanted to feel satisfaction at Bennett's downfall, but mostly he felt sadness at the waste. Bennett had thrown away his career, his freedom, and his reputation because he couldn't see past his own biases. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Reynolds. "Did you see the news? Want to make a statement?" Terrence typed his response. "No statement needed. Bennett's rehabilitation is between him and his conscience. Our focus remains on systematic reform." But the media wanted Terrence's reaction. Within an hour, he'd received calls from 15 news organizations requesting interviews about Bennett's release. He declined most, but agreed to a brief statement released through the Air Force Public Affairs Office. "Officer Bennett's early release doesn't change the need for continued reform of police practices and accountability systems. I hope he genuinely uses this second chance to help prevent others from making his mistakes. But individual redemption doesn't eliminate institutional problems that made his misconduct possible." The statement was measured and focused on systemic issues rather than personal attacks. It reflected Terrence's consistent approach: use individual cases to illuminate systematic problems, but keep the focus on institutional reform. Bennett followed through on his commitment. He began speaking at police academies and training sessions, sharing his story as a warning about the consequences of racial bias. His presentations were uncomfortable and unflinching. "I convinced myself I wasn't racist," Bennett told a room full of police recruits at the Denver Police Academy. "I told myself I treated everyone the same. But when I watched the videos of my interaction with Captain Bradford, I couldn't deny the truth. I profiled him. I escalated unnecessarily. I let my biases override my training and judgment." He showed the viral footage of himself shoving Terrence. The recruits watched in uncomfortable silence. "Every officer in this room will face moments where your biases could lead you to make the same mistakes I made," Bennett continued. "The question is whether you'll recognize those moments and make different choices than I did." The presentations were effective precisely because they came from someone who'd experienced consequences. Bennett's story resonated with officers in ways that traditional bias training didn't. Terrence heard about Bennett's rehabilitation efforts through the Civil Rights Network. Multiple people reached out asking if he opposed Bennett's second chance at redemption. His response was consistent. Accountability includes allowing people to change. If Bennett genuinely understands the harm he caused and works to prevent similar harm, that's positive. But his individual redemption doesn't erase the systematic problems that enabled his misconduct. June 2030 marked 5 years since the airport incident. Terrence, now Colonel Bradford, commanding an entire operations group, stood before a packed auditorium at the Air Force Academy, delivering the commencement address. The graduating class represented the most diverse in Academy history. Women comprised 38% of graduates. Minority cadets represented 42%. And every graduate had received comprehensive bias training as part of their leadership education. 5 years ago, I was assaulted by a police officer who profiled me based on my race, Terrence told the graduates. That incident became a catalyst for systematic reforms that transformed police accountability, corporate practices, and institutional culture across America. He clicked to a slide showing statistics. Police killings of unarmed civilians down 43% nationally. Discrimination complaints in the military down 31%. Corporate bias training participation up 200%. Federal civil rights investigations resulting in institutional reforms up 187%. These numbers represent real progress, Terrence said, but they also reveal how much work remains. A 43% reduction in police killings of unarmed civilians means 57% are still dying unnecessarily. Discrimination complaints declining means fewer incidents or better accountability, but bias hasn't been eliminated. He looked at the sea of young faces preparing to serve their country. Your generation inherited accountability systems mine had to fight to create. You have documentation tools, legal precedents, and cultural expectations supporting equality. Use these advantages to push progress even further. The graduates listened intently as Terrence outlined the challenges ahead. Artificial intelligence systems encoding historical biases into algorithmic decision-making. Immigration policies reflecting discriminatory attitudes toward particular nationalities. Climate change disproportionately affecting minority communities. Economic inequality reinforcing racial hierarchies. These problems require your generation's creative solutions, systematic thinking, and unwavering commitment to equality, Terrence concluded. The accountability systems we built provide tools. How you use those tools will determine whether progress continues or stalls. The graduates rose in applause. Many would go on to military careers defending equality within institutional structures. Others would pursue civilian paths applying lessons learned at the academy. All had been shaped by a culture that took accountability seriously. After the ceremony, Terrence met with Marcus Williams, the teenager who'd recorded the airport incident and was now graduating in the top 10% of his class. Marcus had received an assignment to pilot training, following the path Terrence had pioneered decades earlier. "Sir, I wouldn't be here without your example," Marcus said. "Watching how you handled that situation taught me that demanding justice was possible and worthwhile." Terrence shook his hand firmly. "Lieutenant Williams, you earned this through your own merit, but I'm honored to have played a small role in your journey. Now your responsibility is being the leader and role model for those following behind you." The conversation reminded Terrence that systematic change happened through individual choices compounding over time. One documented incident inspired one teenager to pursue military service. That teenager would train other pilots who would mentor future generations. The ripple effects continued propagating forward. Logan Bennett attended the graduation ceremony as well, though in a different capacity. He'd been invited to speak at a pre-ceremony workshop on confronting bias in leadership. His presentation was titled, "How Unchecked Prejudice Destroyed My Career and How Systematic Accountability Saved My Life." Bennett spoke honestly about his failures, the harm he caused, and his ongoing efforts at redemption. He'd become a respected voice in police reform, circles precisely because he acknowledged, rather than minimized, his misconduct. "I tell my story, not to excuse what I did, but to prevent others from making my mistakes," Bennett told the cadets attending his workshop. "Every decision I made that day at the airport reflected biases I refused to examine. Captain Bradford's systematic response forced accountability that ultimately helped me become a better person." After the workshop, Bennett and Terrence spoke briefly in a hallway. The conversation was cordial, though not warm. 5 years had passed, but the harm Bennett caused remained real. "Colonel Bradford, thank you for agreeing to let me speak here," Bennett said. "I know my presence might be uncomfortable." Terrence nodded. "Your story serves a purpose, showing future leaders the consequences of unchecked bias. But redemption doesn't erase harm. The goal is preventing similar harm going forward." "I understand," Bennett replied. "And for what it's worth, the systematic changes your case catalyzed have probably prevented thousands of incidents like ours. That's the real legacy." They shook hands briefly before separating. The interaction symbolized complicated truths about accountability and redemption. Bennett's transformation was genuine and valuable, but Terrence's focus remained on systematic reforms rather than individual reconciliation. The Bradford Foundation celebrated its 5th anniversary with a gala fundraiser in Denver. Over 500 people attended, including civil rights leaders, politicians, corporate executives, and ordinary citizens who'd been helped by the Foundation's work. Foundation Director Stephanie Clark presented an impact report. In 5 years, the Foundation had supported 873 discrimination cases, funded 142 research projects on bias reduction, trained 15,000 people in documentation and advocacy techniques, and distributed $12 million in grants to civil rights organizations. But statistics only told part of the story. Clark invited several foundation clients to share their experiences. Tamika Johnson, the physician who'd been racially profiled by hospital security, spoke about how foundation support helped her achieve justice and reform. My case wasn't just about personal vindication. It changed hospital policies affecting thousands of healthcare workers and patients. That's the power of systematic advocacy. Rachel Thompson, the professor who documented workplace discrimination, described how her successful complaint inspired other faculty members to challenge bias. Seeing accountability work gave people courage to demand fairness. Now our university has genuine policies protecting against discrimination, rather than just policies on paper. Kevin Martinez, the small business owner who'd recorded discriminatory treatment during a loan application, explained how his settlement funded expansion of his business and creation of a microloan program for minority entrepreneurs. One documented incident of discrimination became seed money to help dozens of other business owners overcome systematic barriers to capital. Each story illustrated the compounding effects of accountability. Individual justice produced institutional reforms that protected future victims, who then inspired others to challenge discrimination. The cycle created momentum toward equality. Terrence addressed the gala attendees, reflecting on 5 years of transformation. When Logan Bennett shoved me at that airport, I had a choice. Accept it silently, get angry without recourse, or document systematically and demand accountability. I chose documentation and accountability, not because I'm particularly courageous, but because I understood that systematic change requires systematic evidence. He outlined the key lessons learned. Documentation is essential but insufficient without legal advocacy. Individual cases matter most when they produce institutional reforms. Accountability systems work better than relying on individual good intentions. And cultural change happens through persistent effort over time, not dramatic gestures. The 5 years since that airport incident prove that systematic advocacy produces systematic change, Terrence concluded. We've transformed police accountability, corporate practices, educational policies, and healthcare systems. But the work continues because discrimination adapts and institutions resist reform. Your ongoing support and activism ensure progress continues.